On this episode of Black Girl Gone, I tell the story of Makeva Jenkins, who was brutally murdered on June 29th, 2017 in Lake Worth, Florida. Makeva was a mother of three and an entrepreneur who had overcome incredible odds. But in the middle of the night, inside her own home, that life was stolen from her in the most shocking way. At first, it seemed like a random act of violence, a home invasion gone terribly wrong. But as detectives dug deeper, the truth they uncovered revealed a betrayal so devastating, it shook everyone who loved her. This is Makeva's story. In 2017, 33-year-old Makeva Jenkins seemed to be living the life that she had always dreamed of. A devoted mother of three, and a determined entrepreneur. She had overcome obstacles that could have broken her spirit. She was building a future that she once only imagined. But one summer night, everything changed. What should have been the start of her next chapter ended in tragedy, and the truth behind her death would leave those who loved her shattered. Makeva was born on August 9th, 1983 in Belle Glade, a small city in Palm Beach County, Florida. She was raised by her grandmother, and from an early age, her family knew that she stood out. Her aunt Sabrina Yarns later said that she, quote-unquote, was special from day one. As a teenager, Makeva was well-liked and active in school. She was elected homecoming queen and had a wide circle of friends, but she was also very serious about her future. Sabrina described her as a quote-unquote hard worker and a model student. Good grades were mandatory in our house, she said. After high school, Makeva enrolled at the University of South Florida. But while she was there, her life changed in a way that she hadn't planned. She learned that she was pregnant, and at a young age, she became a mother to her daughter Sanaya. Now, for many, that might have meant putting their dreams on hold. But Makeva stayed the course. She finished her degree and later went on to earn her master's. Her brother, Marquavius Quay Greer, remembered how deeply she loved her daughter, telling Oxygen, quote, "She was a fantastic mom. She and Sanaya were just the best of buddies." Now, even while balancing motherhood and school, Makeva always had her eye toward entrepreneurship. She started a small business of her own and was determined to create something lasting. But still, she wanted more than just professional success. She dreamed of building a family and a life filled with stability, goals that she worked tirelessly to achieve. By the end of the 2000s, Makeva had built a life centered around her daughter and her business and her dreams of one day having a family. And that chance seemed to arrive on New Year's Eve of 2009. At a church celebration that night, she met a young barber named Yuri Jenkins, the son of a pastor. Friends say Makeva was instantly taken with him. Her friend Kimberly Wilson remembered the way Makeva smiled as she talked about him, saying, quote, "She had this big grin on her face. You could tell that she was really excited." For Makeva, Yuri represented something that she longed for, that stability, love, and the possibility of having a family of her own. He seemed to also share her values, and to her, their meeting felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Those close to her, however, urged caution. They were worried that things were moving a little too fast, but just a few months into their relationship, Makeva was pregnant. And in time, the couple welcomed a son. And soon after, in 2011, they married. Her brother Quay walked her down the aisle. He later said, quote, "That was the happiest I've ever seen her." And for Makeva, it felt like she had finally found the balance that she had always worked for. A family of her own alongside the career and life that she was still building. But a few years into their marriage, cracks began to appear. Makeva learned that Yuri had been unfaithful and had fathered a child with another woman. And the revelation hit her hard. According to her brother, she made the difficult choice to kick him out. But still, her feelings for him didn't disappear, and eventually they reconciled. And together, they turned their energy towards her ambitions. Yuri began supporting Makeva as she launched the Prime Enterprise Group, a business that helped others turn ideas into real plans and opportunities. The venture brought them that stability that they hadn't known before. After years of working to make ends meet, the couple finally started to enjoy the life that they had dreamed of. And the arrival of their daughter added another bright chapter to their story. And friends noticed a new sense of happiness in Makeva. Her friend Kimberly recalled in an interview with Oxygen how she seemed content, as if everything that she had worked for was finally aligning. And by 2017, Makeva's life seemed to really be falling into place. Her business was thriving, her family was growing, and after years of struggle, she was finally finding that stability that she had longed for. Friends and family noticed the shift. She carried herself with confidence and a quiet pride, proud of what she had built from scratch. But beneath the surface, not everything was as it seemed. Even as she worked tirelessly to expand her business, personal challenges quietly lingered. The reconciliation with Yuri had brought back hope, but old wounds and tension remained, even if they were hidden behind the smiles and social media posts. And in May of that year, according to reports, Makeva filed for divorce from Yuri. Now, it's not clear exactly why, but it's suspected that it was due to infidelity on Yuri's part once again. But shortly after, she discovered that she was pregnant again, and the news changed everything. She called off the divorce and decided to continue to build a life with him. Friends and family noticed a mix of emotions. While she hoped for a fresh start, there were issues in their marriage that hadn't been dealt with. It was a delicate balance, juggling the joys of her growing family with the weight of the betrayals. Yet, Makeva continued to focus on her dreams, her business, and her children, determined to make the next chapter of her life a success. But little did she know, the life that she had fought so hard to achieve would soon be shattered in a way that no one could have imagined. Wednesday, June 28, 2017, began like any other day for Makeva and her family. Reports say that she had a meeting with a client that day, but it's not clear what else she did. However, we do know that she was home that evening with her kids. Yuri was also home. Her brother Quay had come over, and he and Yuri were hanging out in the garage, where Yuri would often chill and cut hair. As the night progressed, Makeva began scrolling on Facebook, and in a moment of reflection, decided to post a status about how far she had come in life. At 11:24 p.m., Makeva wrote about an encounter that she had had with a woman who she had been Facebook friends with, who reached out to her about her business plans. She talked about how back in 2011, when they first connected, she couldn't even afford the $99 for a course that she wanted to take. Quote, fast forward, we overcame being homeless in 2013/2014 to reach my six-figure mark in 2015 to now making multi-six figures. No matter what the road looked like, I followed my heart and stuck with it, growing, Makeva wrote. She was proud of her accomplishments. She had worked hard. Now, after her post, she stayed up for a little while longer, talking to people till about 12:30 a.m. And after that, it's assumed that she went to bed. Meanwhile, Yuri and Quay stayed in the garage. At one point, Quay left to buy some items from a local 7-Eleven, and when he returned to the house, a friend of Yuri's named Dimitri Dale had come over. He was sitting on the couch. Quay said that Yuri insisted that he give him a haircut, and so he sat down in the chair. But just a few hours after Makeva made that final Facebook post, in the early morning hours of June 29th, 2017, devastation erupted in the Jenkins household. At around 2:17 a.m., the Lake Worth Police Department received a frantic 911 call. The call came from Makeva's brother Quay. His voice was raw with panic, screaming over and over here, "Get here now. My sister is fighting for her life, man." The night had begun quietly, with Makeva resting upstairs, her children tucked into bed, and Yuri and Quay hanging out in the garage, and it had spiraled into a nightmare in just a matter of moments. When police arrived, they walked into chaos. Officers rushed inside and headed upstairs, where they found Makeva in her bedroom. She was lying under the sheets, suffering from a gunshot wound to the head. Yuri was there when they arrived, and he was in the bedroom, using the white shirt that he had been wearing to try to stop the bleeding while waiting for paramedics to arrive. When police pulled him aside to ask what happened, he told them that masked intruders, dressed in all black, had come into the house demanding to know about someone named Quest. At the time, police didn't realize that Quest was a nickname for Makeva's mother. But according to Yuri, the gunman eventually made his way into the master bedroom where Makeva had been sleeping, and then he shot her. Officers instructed Yuri, Quay, and their friend Dmitry to step outside while they secured the scene. Makeva was still alive, but barely. She was rushed to Delray Medical Center. Now, meanwhile, deputies spoke to Quay and Dmitry, and both men told investigators the same story that Yuri had, that a masked gunman had come into the garage, forced himself inside, and then demanded to know about someone named Quest, and then, without warning, walked upstairs and shot Makeva as she lay in bed. From the beginning, detectives weren't convinced that the story that they were being told made sense. A masked intruder bursting into a home full of people who were awake in the middle of the night, demanding money and asking for someone named Quest, only to walk upstairs and shoot a woman lying in bed. It sounded strange, but even stranger was that nothing in the house appeared to have been taken. Investigators began by going over the sequence of events with each of the men in the home that night, Yuri, Quay, and Dmitry. Now, if this had been a robbery, why hadn't anything been stolen from the home? And why would a gunman single out Makeva, a woman who had been sleeping, instead of the three men who were awake and directly in front of him? While investigators were combing through the scene, Makeva was still fighting for her life. Paramedics had rushed her to a hospital where doctors worked desperately to save her. Family and friends gathered, holding on to any bit of hope. But just moments after she was shot, Makeva had succumbed to her injuries. The 33-year-old mother, who had worked so hard to build a better life for herself and her children, was gone. Her death sent shockwaves through her family. The loss was not only sudden, but it was brutal. She had been taken in the very place where she should have been the safest. As investigators started piecing together the timeline, they learned more about what had unfolded in the hours before the shooting. And as they dug deeper, they began to uncover details that complicated the narrative and hinted that the story they were getting may not have been the full truth. In the early morning hours of June 29, 2017, 33-year-old Makeva Jenkins was shot to death while she slept in her bed. And now investigators needed to find out what really happened inside that home that night. After the scene was secured, all three men in the home when the shooting took place were separated and interviewed at the scene. Now, although they had all given similar accounts, they also each added something different to the investigation. Dmitry had been interviewed first inside the garage of the home, and he told police that he had been there for about 20 minutes before the gunman entered the home. He said that they were all ordered to the ground and then led inside and up to the second floor. Once there, Yuri said that his son was in his room, and Dmitry said that he asked the intruder if he could take the child downstairs, to which he agreed. He then took the child outside to the patio and then waited. A few seconds later, Dmitry said that the man came downstairs with Quay, leaving Yuri alone upstairs, and began demanding keys to the cars outside. Dmitry said that he volunteered his keys handing them over to the gunman. He then led Greer back upstairs, and then a few seconds later, he said that he heard 2 gunshots. The suspect then fled the home and got into the Dodge Charger that Dimitri had been driving and left. Quay was interviewed next, and his story was the same as Dimitri's. Now, police had learned early that the intruder had been asking for Quest, and they had since discovered that Quest was the nickname of Makeva's mother. Quay said that when they were first led into the home, Dimitri kept asking him who Quest was, and that repeatedly the gunman asked him where she was, leading Quay to believe that they were looking for his mother and must have assumed that she would be at her daughter's house. Now, when police asked him why someone would kill his sister, he began crying and said, quote unquote, because of my mom. He had learned that she had allegedly been buying drugs with fake money and that one of the drug dealers she purchased from was threatening to do something to her. And then last to be interviewed at the scene was Yuri. Now, when he was told that the interview was being recorded and that he could be charged for lying, he laughed and said, quote unquote, this is like Criminal Minds. He then proceeded to tell the officer the same story that Dimitri and Quay had told about the events of that night. He said that when the gunman asked him where Quest was, he said that he admitted to him that he did know Quest, but that she wasn't there. But he believed that he shot Makeva anyway, believing that she was Quest. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, investigators leaned heavily on the statements given by Yuri, Quay, and Dimitri. All 3 told nearly identical stories, and police noted how consistent their accounts were. And in those first hours, that consistency carried weight. Investigators wrote that the suspect's behavior didn't really fit the profile of someone committing a robbery. There was no ransacking, no attempt to steal valuables. But without any direct evidence linking either Yuri, Quay, or Dimitri to the shooting, detectives couldn't disprove what they were saying either. Now, the idea that the shooting might somehow be connected to Makeva's mother, since the intruder repeatedly asked for Quest, was considered as a possible lead. With no evidence to contradict the men's statements, police treated them more like witnesses than suspects. Consent was given by Yuri to search the home, and investigators began working the scene, trying to piece together what really happened. After the interviews, investigators searched the home and canvassed the neighborhood, looking for witnesses and homes with surveillance cameras in hopes that someone had seen something or captured something that would lead to a suspect. Later that same morning, investigators reached out to Makeva Harold, Makeva's mother, who had been mentioned repeatedly the night before. The masked intruder had been asking for someone named Quest, and detectives needed to understand why. When they met with her, Makeva explained that she had learned that her daughter had been shot when other family members called to tell her what happened. At the time, she was at her own home in Belgrade, and she rushed to Delray Medical Center, but by the time she arrived, Makeva had already passed away. Investigators pressed her about whether anyone might be looking to harm her. Rumors had swirled about the gunman's demands for her and that it meant that she had been the real target. But she denied it. She told detectives that she had no enemies, no drug debts, and no reason to believe anyone would come after her. She acknowledged that she sometimes had what she called play money, fake bills, but insisted that she had never used them to buy drugs. She was adamant. If anyone had wanted to find her, they knew exactly where she lived. She rarely visited her daughter's home, and she couldn't believe that anyone would want to go to Makeva's house looking for her. The interview left investigators with more questions than answers. If the gunman was truly after Makeva, then why would he target her daughter instead? And if this wasn't about her at all, then what exactly had happened? News of Makeva's death spread quickly, and the reaction was immediate. People who knew her, clients, friends, neighbors, even those who only followed her online, were stunned. Just hours earlier, she had shared a message of triumph and gratitude on Facebook, reflecting on how far she had come. And now she was gone. The senselessness of it all left people reeling. How could someone who had overcome so much and who was so focused on building a better life for her family be taken in such a violent way? In the days that followed, the shock reached far beyond her immediate circle. To those who knew her personally, it was the devastating loss of a daughter, a sister, a mother, and a friend. And to others, it was the loss of a woman who had become a symbol of resilience, someone who had worked her way out of hardship and was finally reaping the rewards of her determination. Her murder wasn't just a private tragedy. It was a story that struck a nerve in the broader community. People wanted answers, and they wanted justice. In the days immediately after the shooting, Yuri Jenkins appeared to the outside world as a devastated husband. On the second day of the investigation, he sat down with a local news station to talk about his wife, their life together, and the night that she was killed. In an interview, Yuri described Makeva as more than just a victim of a violent home invasion. He called her a good wife, a good mother, and an entrepreneur who had worked her way from nothing to something. He spoke about her Christian faith, about how deeply she cared for her children, and about the success that she had built for herself. He also shared what he said were his last moments with her. Quote, "I held her in my arms. She was alive," he told the reporter, recalling the moments after the gunmen stormed into their home and shot her in the bedroom. To those watching, it was the image of a grieving husband, a man trying to make sense of the unimaginable loss of his wife, holding on to memories of the life that they shared. But while Yuri was speaking to the press as a heartbroken widower, investigators were quietly beginning to wonder if there was more to the story than what he had been saying. Now, less than 24 hours after the murder, detectives were back in the Jenkins neighborhood, looking for anything that could explain what happened. The community security guard confirmed that he had gone off duty at 1 a.m., leaving a window of time that was unmonitored. And investigators then obtained surveillance footage from a neighbor, and his cameras looked directly onto the street where the Jenkins lived and captured movement just before and after the shooting. At 2:03 a.m., a Dodge Charger, believed to be driven by Dimitri Dale, pulled onto the street and parked, and then repositioned closer to the Jenkins home. Minutes later, someone was seen getting out of the passenger side before the headlights were turned off. At 2:08 a.m., Quay returned to the neighborhood in his Malibu after his trip to the store, and then 11 minutes later, at 2:19 a.m., the Charger sped away from the scene. The timeline from the video gave investigators a clearer sense of what happened that night, and the details raised troubling questions. Why was the car waiting outside just before the shooting, and who had stepped out of it? To detectives, this was the first sign that the story of a random home invasion didn't add up. Now, on June 30th, just a day after the murder, Dimitri Dale voluntarily came in for another interview. Detectives wanted to clarify parts of the statement that he had given at the scene, and this time his account raised questions. Now, he admitted that on June 28th, the day before the shooting, that he had brought a friend named Jovan Joseph to the Jenkins home. Dimitri insisted that Jovan was only there to hang out, play basketball, and get a haircut. But this was the first time that Jovan's name entered the investigation. Dimitri's story was riddled with contradictions. At the scene, he said the gunman threw him to the ground, but now he claimed he dropped voluntarily. He gave conflicting reasons for why he didn't escape with the baby, first saying that he forgot, then blaming the fence, and then later admitting that he just didn't know why. He repeatedly, however, emphasized his innocence, but his explanations came off as scattered and defensive. Now, the same day, detectives contacted Joseph using the number that Dimitri had provided. Javon Joseph also came in voluntarily and said that he and Dimitri had been friends for years. He recalled going to the Jenkins home for the first time on June 28th, describing it as quote-unquote really nice, and said that he saw Makeva arrive home, though he never spoke to her. Javon admitted that he was driving Dimitri's Dodge Charger that day to impress some girls, but denied being anywhere near the Lakeworth home the night of the shooting. Instead, he claimed that he was visiting a woman named Lily, who was hospitalized at Good Samaritan. Joseph didn't appear nervous or deceptive during the interview. In fact, he seemed surprised to even be questioned about a murder. He denied involvement, agreed to provide DNA, and confirmed his home address. He also said that Dimitri never mentioned a murder, only that his Charger had been stolen and that he was traumatized by the ordeal. For investigators, the early days of the case were filled with conflicting stories and half-truths. Yuri painted himself as the grieving husband. Dimitri insisted that he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Javon Joseph, a teenager with little connection to Makeva, barely seemed to grasp why he was even being questioned at all. But detectives weren't relying on words alone. They were building a case, piece by piece. Surveillance footage, cell phone records, and interviews slowly were painting a picture that was very different from the story that the men had originally told. Every lead they followed seemed to chip away at the idea that this was a random home invasion. And after weeks of investigating, the evidence began to reveal a chilling sequence of events. After several interviews, Dimitri finally admitted that on the night of the shooting, Joseph, who was only 19 years old, pulled a gun on him and forced him to drive to the Jenkins home. Cameras in the neighborhood backed this up. One clip showed Joseph abandoning a car nearby and then climbing into Dimitri's vehicle. Soon after, another camera captured Dimitri walking toward the Jenkins residence, followed by Javon Joseph. The timing aligned almost exactly with when Makeva was shot. And then came the phones. Detectives uncovered a suspicious pattern. In the days leading up to the murder, whenever Yuri contacted Dimitri, Dimitri would immediately reach out to Javon. It wasn't a coincidence. It was coordination. And then finally, Dimitri broke. He told investigators what they suspected all along, that this wasn't the work of masked intruders or a drug dealer hunting down Makeva's mother. And he admitted that he knew who the killer was from the start. It was the turning point in the investigation. The story of a grieving husband collapsed under the weight of hard evidence, exposing the devastating truth. The man Makeva loved, had trusted, had orchestrated her death. Javon Joseph continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the murder, but investigators weren't buying it, and within days, his name was no longer just floating in the background of the case. He was at the center of it. Detectives believed that they had enough to prove his role, and in September 2017, Javon Joseph was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and the killing of Makeva Jenkins. The arrest of Javon was a major break in the case, but for investigators, it wasn't enough. They believed that Javon hadn't acted on his own, that someone had set this plan into motion, and slowly, those pieces were beginning to fall into place. With the evidence mounting, Javon, who had maintained his innocence, even initially pleading not guilty, eventually told detectives the truth, that both he and Dimitri had been paid for their roles in the murder, and that the money, he claimed directly from Yuri. Based on the evidence, statements from both Dmitri and Jovan, Yuri had been plotting his wife's murder for weeks. Dmitri said that Yuri told him that he hated her and he wanted her dead. For months, detectives quietly worked behind the scenes to strengthen their case. And then, in December 2017, the investigation took a stunning turn. The man who had gone on television calling his wife a devoted mother and entrepreneur, the man who had been seen crying and praying with family, was arrested. Yuri Jenkins was charged with first-degree murder, accused of hiring Joseph and Dmitri Dale to kill his wife while she slept in their bed. The news sent shockwaves through the community. For those who had watched Yuri grieve publicly, the arrest felt like a betrayal. The unthinkable possibility that the grieving husband wasn't a victim at all, but the mastermind. As the case moved closer to trial, both Dmitri Dale and Jovan Joseph decided to cut deals with prosecutors. Their cooperation would prove crucial in building the case against Yuri Jenkins. Joseph pled guilty to second-degree murder in 2019. His sentencing was deferred until after he testified at Jenkins' trial, but under the terms of his plea, he faced a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 20 years in prison for his role in Makeva's killing. Dmitri Dale, on the other hand, positioned himself as the middleman, the one who had introduced Jovan and Yuri, but not someone directly involved in carrying out the plot. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter with a weapon and was sentenced to 15 years of probation. For prosecutors, these agreements meant that they had two key witnesses willing to take the stand and tell the jury what really happened, even if it meant saving themselves in the process. Now, the arrest of Yuri Jenkins stunned nearly everyone who had followed the case, but the truest test came in court, where prosecutors laid out their theory that Yuri had orchestrated his wife's murder for money. The trial began in April 2022, nearly 5 years after Makeva was murdered. According to prosecutors, Yuri stood to gain nearly $500,000 from Makeva's life insurance policy. However, it was only after his wife's murder that he learned that he was not the beneficiary of her policy, and therefore entitled to nothing. The state argued that her success, both as a businesswoman and as the breadwinner in the family, created tension in their marriage. Yuri, they claimed, wanted her gone, and he was willing to pay others to make it happen. Jurors heard testimony about the phone records, the surveillance footage, and the $10,000 payments that Joseph and Dale said they received. Prosecutors painted a picture of a husband who had carefully staged a break-in only to betray the woman who had once trusted him most. Yuri, for his part, maintained his innocence. Through his attorneys, he argued that Joseph and Dale were liars who were trying to save themselves by painting the murder on him. In the end, justice for Makeva would be decided in that courtroom. And after days of testimony and weeks of evidence, the verdict came in. Yuri Jenkins was found guilty of first-degree murder. Prosecutors had convinced the jury that the man who had once held himself as a grieving husband was in fact the mastermind who plotted his wife's death for money. With that verdict came a mandatory sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Makeva's family, the moment was bittersweet. They had waited years for justice, but no prison sentence could undo the pain of losing her. During sentencing, her grandmother spoke through tears, telling the court that, quote, nobody wins in this case. And she was right. Nothing could bring Makeva back. Makeva Jenkins was only 33 years old, a mother of 3, a woman who fought her way out of struggle, and someone who managed to turn her pain into purpose. She inspired many, but her life ended in the most brutal way imaginable, taken in her home, in front of the family that she loved, at the hands of someone that she should have been able to trust. The betrayal behind her murder made the loss even more unbearable. And for the people that loved her, it wasn't just that she was gone. It was the chilling knowledge that the person who should have protected her was the one who plotted against her. And that truth will forever haunt those who knew her. May Makeva Jenkins rest in peace. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Threads.